As much fun a designer has in designing a new class with bespoke mechanics, it is ultimately the players that have to play that class out and live with it for many sessions, if not years. And so it is understandable that players are the biggest critiquers of class design. And yet, players, myself included, frequently fall prey to these two particular design evaluation fallacies that I want to discuss today. Hey everyone, Utkarsh from Spirit Bell Games here. So I will be talking today about the two major design fallacies, or not design evaluation fallacies that I see come up frequently when people discuss particular player character options. And these two that I will start by talking about, I see them come up irrespective of systems. So whether you're playing Pathfinder 2nd Edition or you're playing Dungeons & Dragons or Drawsteel or Daggerheart, I want you to think about these two design evaluation fallacies and make sure that you're not falling prey to them when you are critiquing a class design or any other character option design. Now, there's also the Patreon extended edition of this video that you can watch for free, which has 3 additional fallacies that are unique to Pathfinder 2nd Edition. I will mention them at the end of this video, but I will dive into them in that Patreon extended edition, which again, you can watch for free by following the link below. So let us first discuss the two universal design fallacies that I see people falling prey to. The first one is assuming that the design goals you have in mind were the design goals that the designer had in mind. So assuming the fantasy. This shows up in Pathfinder 2nd Edition with wizards and sorcerers in low-level play, where I believe that the design of those two classes assume that you will be wielding a light crossbow and using it and reloading it in between casting focus spells and cantrips. This assumption that I have is because, yes, the designers gave simple weapon proficiencies to both these classes, and also that is a character fantasy that has been inherited from previous editions of Pathfinder Dungeons & Dragons. But this is not the fantasy of the wizard or sorcerer that many players seem to have right now, and that is understandable. We've been exposed to a lot of media in the past decade or so where a magic user can only lean on their magic to be effective. And so many of us want that to be the core fantasy from level 1 itself. It is appropriate to say that this is a fantasy that you desire, but it is less appropriate to say that by playing those two classes in this way, by playing a wizard without using any weapons at low level, and then finding that the wizard is not performing as well as other classes, that the wizard is poorly designed. It's not poorly designed, it is unable to meet your fantasy expectations. So this kind of design expectation misalignment, or fantasy expectation misalignment, I should say, is the cause of many complaints that surface when people are critiquing a particular class. And again, it's okay to say what you want from a class, what you would like its fantasy to be, especially during playtest. But once a class has been released and you're looking at its design with a critical lens, it is better to try and view it without your own expectations in mind. Just try and remove them as much as you can. Understand the mechanics. Figure out what would be a good flow play pattern with the mechanics that are given in the class as presented, and then try and understand what fantasy the designers were designing it for. So this is the first of the two generic fallacies, assuming fantasy. And the second fallacy that commonly comes up is when people compare classes and compare options. The fallacy that I see people commonly fall into is comparing a bad option from one class, a bad feature from one class, with a good feature from another class. And I know that sounds like an obvious way to compare classes, but here's what I would rather have you do. I would rather have you compare all the good and bad features from one class with all the good and bad features from another class. Let us take Well, actually, before we get to Pathfinder 2nd Edition example, I want to talk about Dungeons & Dragons, the 2014 edition, which I rarely do in this channel, but this is a good way to illustrate a point while showcasing some of the strengths of that system. So when D&D 2014 came out, and for many years afterwards, people were upset with the Ranger class because the Ranger class got a few ribbon features like favored terrain that didn't seem to come up as often as they would have liked. They wanted more potent class features, and they would compare it with features that the Paladin would get, like Lay on Hands, which are always good. So here you see like a bad feature from a class being compared to a good feature from another class. And I bought into this comparison as well until I watched the video by Treant Monk, where he said these words that resonate with me even now, where he said that I don't judge a class based on what bad features it has. I judge a class poorly if it doesn't have good features. Sounds like he's talking about the same thing, but it's not, because as he goes on to explain in that video, the 2014 Ranger still had the primal spell list, which had conjure animals. They still have the archery fighting style and access to feats that would give them sharpshooter. And combining these very core aspects of the class, maybe not the flashiest or the most unique aspects of the class, but combining these core aspects, you could have made a powerful Ranger. Now, the class also happened to get some bad ribbon features. But again, what he said was, I do not judge a class based on what bad features it has. I judge it poorly if it doesn't have good features. And so my version, my interpretation of that to what principle that I use for comparing design is to try and compare all of the good and bad of one class to all of the good and bad of another. Coming back to Pathfinder 2nd Edition, let's briefly talk about the unstable trait that inventors get. Now, people make direct comparison between the unstable trait and focus spells. They say that the unstable trait was designed to mimic focus spells, an assumption that they are making, which I don't think is an unfounded assumption, because just like original focus spells, the unstable trait works once per combat, and then you have to reset it in 10 minutes with a small chance of working again. And so the player critique right now for the inventor is that because the unstable trait is supposed to be just like focus spells, again, that's still just an assumption, and because focus spells have been buffed, therefore the unstable trait should be buffed so that in the early levels, in the first half of the game, the inventor can reliably use unstable trait twice at least. And I here want to say that you are comparing just like one option from one class with like one option of another class without comparing the full package together. When we look at classes that have focus spells like the Ranger and the Monk, we see that they don't get, without the focus spells, they don't get just raw damage boosts. And so if we wanted to make a more apples to apples comparison, what we should be comparing the inventor to is the Thaumaturge. Both the inventor and the Thaumaturge can get an additional damage boost. Both of them start with their key ability score not being their attack, their weapon attack score. And both of them can get this damage bonus with a successful check. And yet the Thaumaturge does not get focus spells, and the inventor does. And yet the inventor is routinely compared only to classes that do get focus spells and compared unfavorably. If we instead just think of the inventor as someone who can do one cool thing per encounter at least, in addition to whatever damage boost that they get, and we compare it to the Thaumaturge, now we may be able to see why the designers made the decisions that they did. So those are the two generic fallacies that I see people fall prey to. One is assuming the fantasy, that the designers have the same fantasy that you might have for a class. And the second is comparing a bad option of one class with a good option of the other class without comparing the whole package. In the Patreon Extended Edition, I talk about 3 additional fallacies that Pathfinder 2nd Edition players especially are vulnerable to. One is assuming free archetype. The second is assuming rotations, or worse, desiring rotations. And the third is assuming the universality of action flexibility. So join me in the Patreon exclusive version to catch the discussion and examples of those three particular fallacies. For now, this is me signing off, wishing you all engaging games.